I've always been drawn to the shadows, to the stories that linger on the edge of reality, whispered in hushed tones, or screamed in terror. My fascination with the supernatural isn't born out of a belief in ghost tales or urban legends, but rather a curiosity of the unknown, the unexplained. It's this curiosity that led me to the abandoned hospital on the outskirts of town, a place so shrouded in mystery and fear that even mentioning its name sends shivers down the spines of the locals. The hospital, known to those brave enough to speak of it as St. James Treasury, has been a dark mark on my town's history for decades. Stories of medical accidents, abuses of power, and negligence are said to be the main reason for its abrupt closure. St. James Treasury was once a beacon of hope. It now stands as a monument to despair, its walls echoing with the agony and dread of the past. The rumors of unexplained disappearances, of shadows moving in the darkness, and of cries that pierce the silent night have been dismissed by many as mere superstition. The best stories were told to me by my grandfather of a creature that ate the souls of the lost. With all that said, I was curious. The pull of St. James Treasury was irresistible to me, a challenge to uncover the truth hidden within its decaying walls. It's said that one can only really experience an abandoned site after midnight. So, I waited, armed with nothing but my camera, a flashlight, and a relentless desire for answers and intrigue. I made my way to the hospital. The night was heavy with fog as I drove to the hospital. I couldn't see a foot ahead of me. The closer I got, the heavier the air felt, as if the very atmosphere was trying to dissuade me from proceeding. I had a dreadful feeling in my gut that caused my palms to sweat, but the allure of the unknown drew me ever forward like a moth to a flame. As I stood before the gaping maw of the hospital's main entrance, a bone-chilling wind whispered through the broken windows, carrying with it a warning. A premonition of the mistake awaiting inside. It was in that moment, on the threshold of darkness, that I realized I was about to enter not just an abandoned building, but a realm where the rules of the living no longer applied. I thought to myself how fitting it was that such a populated building used for healing was now empty and the epicenter of decades of nightmares. Something gnawed on my thoughts, an attempt to convince me to go home, leave it alone. Unfortunately, I didn't have the discretion to listen. As the heavy silence of the abandoned hospital enveloped me, I took a deep breath and stepped into the darkness, my flashlight cutting a swath through the oppressive gloom. The air was thick with dust, carrying the scent of decay and forgotten memories. Every drop of water falling from the dilapidated ceiling sounded like a gunshot in the silence of the space. Just how many souls were lost to time in this building? I shivered at the thought. My footsteps echoed eerily in the vast, empty halls, each step a testament to the courage I wasn't sure I possessed. The hospital was a labyrinth, a twisted maze of corridors and rooms that seemed designed to confuse and disorient. Many rooms were barred off and scrapped of all its guts, probably in an attempt to make a quick buck. As I ventured deeper, the remnants of the forgotten became more pronounced. Tattered curtains fluttered in the breeze from broken windows, rusted beds lay in disarray, and scattered papers littered the floor, their contents faded beyond recognition. Despite the desolation, there was a beauty in the decay, a story in every crack and crevice. But as I moved from room to room, the unease began to settle in. Sounds that had no source echoed through the halls, soft footfalls that weren't my own, a distant dripping of water that seemed too rhythmic, too intentional. The shadows seemed to move in the periphery of my vision. Despite having no reason to believe so, I felt as though I wasn't alone, like I was being followed. In the heart of the hospital, I found the children's ward, its once vibrant pink and blue walls now peeling and stained. There were rainbows and smiles that were faded and scratched over by obscene graffiti. Though I never knew this hospital, I felt a great sense of nostalgia, a simpler time of juice and warm blankets. It was palpable, the thick, hopeless air and creepy, childlike mischief that was left here to rot. The remnants of toys and drawings hinted at lives interrupted, dreams left to gather dust. It was here, in the silence of forgotten mirth, that I knew. A chill that pierced through my bones, a presence that wasn't my own. It was obvious I was in an area that didn't welcome visitors. The air grew heavy, and for a moment, I could hear a faint melody, like a lullaby, carried on the breeze that shouldn't exist within these sealed walls. My eyes carefully scanned the room. I had to prove to myself I wasn't in any danger. Shaking off the feeling, I reminded myself why I was here. I came for adventure. This was the entire point. This was just a building, its stories long since told. There's nothing to fear, I told myself time and again. Yet, as I turned to leave, a shadow darted across the corner of my vision. Startled, I spun around, flashlight scanning the room, but there was nothing. No one. Just the echo of my own heart, beating a frantic rhythm in the silence. It's all in your head, I told myself. Clearly, this room, or whomever still resided here, wanted me to leave. The deeper I ventured into the bowels of the hospital, the more my reality seemed to bend and warp around me. The air grew colder, the darkness thicker, as if absorbing the light from my flashlight. I stumbled upon an old operating room, its surgical instruments laid out as though waiting for the next procedure. Scalpels had been left on their trays, with dark mahogany stains all over the instruments. My skin crawled at the possibility of those stains being human blood rather than natural rusting. The whole operating room looked as if the inhabitants just disappeared one day. This sight sent shivers down my spine, but it was the sudden, sharp clang of metal against tile that froze me in my tracks. Looking to the ground, I found a rusty scalpel had fallen to the floor, or so it seemed. I bent down to pick it up and inspect further. When I did, my fingers dashed through mist. It disappeared. I had to bite back a scream that tried to claw out of my mouth. Whispers filled my ears again, unintelligible at first, then growing clearer, more insistent. Hastily, my eyes scanned around, my body frozen in place. Where were they coming from? They began addressing me directly, guiding me to the psychiatric ward, a place where the walls themselves seemed to scream with the anguish of those once confined within. I could feel my stomach churn at the side of the door left ajar. It was here, amid the echo of those lost murmurs, that I experienced the most profound sense of despair and loneliness, emotions so powerful they seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was like a tsunami of fear threatened to drown me right then. I needed to leave. As time passed, the activity grew more physical, more threatening and brazen. Doors slammed shut behind me, cutting off my retreat, while shadows moved just beyond the reach of my light, always watching, always following. There were even times I thought I had stopped breathing. Whatever was causing the activity, it felt more at home, contained deep in this area. The labyrinthine hallway seemed to grow with a mind and intention of its own, its sole desire to disorient me. I recorded everything, my camera the only witness to the madness that unfolded around me. Yet, much later, when I went to review the footage, there was only darkness and the sound of my own voice, tinged with a fear I could do nothing to hide. At some point, I found myself in a secluded ward that was nestled away in a corridor hidden from the main hospital. Here, I found an endless number of drawings covering the floor and walls, childlike in their execution but horrific in their imagery. They depicted figures shrouded in darkness, with glowing red eyes that bore into the soul, and a towering, shadowy presence that loomed over the hospital. Little stick figures were laid scattered around the hospital as tentacles connected them to the large, shadowy man, arms extended to the viewer. This was the first time I had seen anything like it, but it took only a second to recognize it. It was a depiction of the hunter my grandfather had warned me about, the heart of the legend, the soul leader. With each step, I felt its gaze upon me, a weight that threatened to crush my spirit, as the drawing's arms were held wide as if to say, I won. At this, I realized that the hospital was in fact alive in a sense. They said that these shadows feed on human fear and suffering. All those atrocities that happened in the shadows in the daylight of St. James Treasury's heyday must have brought it here, and breathed with the memories of those it had claimed, a living record of torment and sorrow. And at its core was the hunter, a force that bound these souls to the physical world, feeding from whatever energy remained, denying them peace. I couldn't stay in that ward for more than a few minutes, feeling a great deal of remorse. My journey through the hospital had led me to the very heart of its darkness, to a place where the veil between worlds felt almost non-existent. The air was charged with a palpable energy, a sense of anticipation as the hairs stood up on my neck. It was as if the building itself was waiting for something, or someone. That someone was, apparently, me. After a time, I found myself standing before the old chapel, in addition to the hospital where patients once sought solace and peace. It looked beautiful, even in its decay. As I stood just beyond the reach of the door's grasp, an angel grazed my ear with a soft whisper. I became aware that this chapel served as the lair of the hunter, the epicenter of the supernatural activity that plagued this hospital. The doors, long since unhinged, stood open, as though inviting me in. I stood there, frozen in place for what felt like an eternity. And then, with every ounce of courage I could muster, I pushed myself forward and stepped inside. The chapel was special. The walls were made of a nice dark cherry hardwood with intricate golden decorations of angels and saints carved into the walls. This place was unlike any other part of the hospital. Here, the decay seemed to hold a certain reverence, a holiness that belied the horror it contained. And at the end of the long room in front of the altar, I could make out a movement, something wholly unnatural. I hesitated forward, trying to stay alert as I subconsciously anticipated an ambush. At the altar, I saw it. The hunter. It was formless at first, yet imposing, a shadow that twisted and writhed in the dim light, his presence so overwhelming that I could barely breathe. It moved in a way that looked as if it was glitching through time and space, like it didn't belong here. The shadow of the hunter oscillated in size as it rattled toward me. I stood there, paralyzed in place as if it had a hold on me. As it approached me, my insides, my soul, felt drenched in a sharp, radiating, all-encompassing fear. I could feel that fear being ripped out of my body, taking my soul with it. It was being operated on, fed on, as this thing took more of a dense, nauseating human shape from my energy. It was as our eyes met, I felt an icy chill pierce my soul, a connection that transcended my physical reality. I was suddenly taken. Images flooded my mind like half-shot movies, memories not my own. The hospital in its prime, the patients, and the disappearances. I saw the truth behind the legend, a truth born of human cruelty and corruption. There was an evil force that existed on that land far before the hospital. Patients were taken, used, and sacrificed to the dark denizens that controlled the staff in their ignorance. The rumors were true, but to see these atrocities unfold before my eyes was excruciating. I could feel the fear of every person who stepped onto this ground as they forcibly met their end, in whatever way they did. The hunter spoke, its voice sounding more like a deep echoing garble of demonic gibberish rather than words. It imprinted upon me a torrent of rage, sorrow, and an insatiable hunger for recognition, for release. It vibrated its pain within my skull, within my being, forcing me to sympathize with its twisted existence. The suffering in this hospital was so thick that it rippled beyond time and space, solidifying an infinite loop of St. James Treasury's tragic past. It was bound to this hospital, trapped by the very thing it had to consume to live. The fear and dread sealed within these walls. The hunter felt a great deal of pain in its existence, yet it was too scared to die, Thus, by infinitely consuming the dark memories of the forgotten, it only adds to its suffering. It then dawned on me that my camera, my flashlight, my desire for adventure, none of it mattered. I had become a witness to the evil that had seeped into the very foundations of the hospital. Perhaps I was called here for a purpose, for a reason bigger than I. As I stared into the tormented, glowing red eyes of the ever-shifting entity, I knew I had to make a choice. To flee and forget, or to confront the darkness and, in doing so, perhaps offer a semblance of peace to the egregore of this creature. Gathering every shed of bravery, I spoke, acknowledging the hunter's pain, its existence. It was a moment of intense vulnerability, a plea for understanding that bridged the gap between the living and the spectral. As I spoke, the chapel grew brighter, like a star had suddenly flared in the middle of the room. The hunter's voice softened and became less distorted until it stopped altogether. The tight grip on my soul began to relax. I could feel myself breathing again. My voice somehow soothed my own heart and allowed for the light to flow out towards the hunter. Before my eyes, the dense, almost solidified shadow of its form began to flicker, diminishing as this light sapped its power. It felt like the dawn of a new day, the sun ushering in a new day as my confidence grew. The hunter shrunk and became more and more transparent, and without a second more, a loud, ear-splitting shriek echoed through the empty halls of the hospital. The hunter vanished completely, leaving behind a silence more profound than any I had ever known. I was alone, truly alone, in the chapel, the weight of the encounter pressing down upon me. A weight had been exorcised from the earth that day in such a meaningful way I don't think any mortal could ever comprehend. I couldn't begin to define true peace. As the silence enveloped the chapel, I stood for a moment, rooted to the spot, struggling to process what had happened. The hunter, the source of so much fear and speculation, was nowhere to be seen. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted from the hospital, a palpable shift in the atmosphere that suggested a peace long denied. With the adrenaline of the encounter fading, exhaustion set in, both physical and emotional. My initial drive of curiosity seemed trivial now, overshadowed by the profound existence of coming face to face with a pain so deep it had given birth to a haunting. The hospital, with its dark corridors and echoing rooms, no longer felt malevolent, but rather mournful, a shell of memories waiting to be laid to rest. It felt as though the hospital itself breathed a sigh of relief, ready to finally return to forgotten dust. Suddenly, the maze-like halls of the hospital simplified, and I made my way out of the chapel, through the wards and corridors that had once filled me with dread. Now, they seemed different, less threatening, as if acknowledging the hunter's presence had lifted the veil of fear that hung over the place. As I stepped outside, I could feel a fresh, soft breeze hug my face, along with the warmth of the waking sun. I could hear the vibrant songs of the robins in the pine trees happily greeting the new day. The first light of dawn painted the hospital in a new perspective, one of closure rather than horror. I felt different. As I walked away, I realized that the hospital story and that of the hunter would stay with me forever. A reminder of the complexities of the human spirit and the power of recognition. The experience had changed me, not just as an explorer of the unknown, but as a person. I had sought to see the truth behind this legend, and had found instead a lesson in understanding that sometimes the ghosts we fear are merely reflections of our own refusal to see and acknowledge the pain of the past. That some truths are universal to the human experience. As I looked back one last time, the hospital no longer seemed like a place to be feared, but rather a monument to the resilience of the human soul. A testament to the fact that even in the darkest of places, there can be light. If only we could be brave enough to see it. Thank you for listening to tonight's episode of ClancyPasta. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, I'd appreciate it if you would give the video a like, subscribe or follow for more, and comment down below. Huge thanks to all of my supporters on Patreon and YouTube members. And if you'd like ad-free narrations along with extra stuff, you can go to patreon.com/ClancyPasta. Okay, thank you all again for listening, and I hope you have a great night. Cheers.